king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 38, Alliance. According to the history that Marin knew, the coalition forces would take a long time to gather troops. It was not until the French went north that they initially gathered more than 30,000 troops. Originally, the commander of this coalition should be the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, who has the highest status. The Pope is not a secular monarch and cannot lead the army in person. However, the miserable Maximilian I was trapped in Worms, an imperial city, one of the meeting points of the imperial parliament, arguing with the guys in the imperial parliament. When the French troops retreated northward, the emperor was still arguing in Worms. Even because the emperor did not come, the tens of thousands of troops of the Holy Roman Empire did not specifically participate in the Battle of Fornovo to block the French army from going north. At the same time, the Spanish army led by Gonzalo de Cordova was in Sicily, spying on the border of Naples, but did not dare to land in Naples and confront the French head-on. So, in fact, the Battle of Fornovo was actually fought by the Italian coalition. The nominal commander of the battle was Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua. However, Marquis Gonzaga lacked prestige and mediocre ability, and could not successfully command the coalition. Therefore, the coalition forces intercepted the French army hastily under poor command. The French army was small and unwilling to fight to the death with the coalition forces, and they could not afford the logistics. Therefore, the French left behind a lot of loot looted in Italy and retreated hastily into France. In this way, the two sides fought evenly. King Charles VIII of France successfully withdrew, and afterwards, both sides claimed victory. However, no one had enough evidence to prove it. In fact, the truth is that the French broke through the coalition's defenses and fled back home, but lost all the baggage and looted property. The coalition failed to intercept them, but they seized a large amount of supplies. In particular, when Charles VIII deliberately scattered the treasures on the road, the coalition cavalry was busy dismounting and looting the property, and did not chase the French at all. Moreover, Marin had once heard a saying that syphilis, which had been rampant in Europe for hundreds of years, seemed to have broken out in Naples during this war. The reason why Charles VIII fled back to the country in a hurry was actually to avoid the rampant syphilis. At the same time, the Neapolitans, led by King Ferdinando of Naples, launched a guerrilla war against the French army to consume the French army's strength. Under multiple blows, and with the Holy Alliance threatening to cut off the French army's return home, Charles VIII panicked and led his main force to retreat northward. Moreover, the main force retreating northward was mainly 8,000 French knights. The reason why knights were allowed to travel by land was because it was difficult to load war horses onto ships. For example, infantry could return on French ships. However, it was more difficult for cavalry. First of all, a horse on board would take up the space of several people. Moreover, horses needed a lot of food and grass. Plus, horses would poop everywhere. Therefore, it was very difficult to load 8,000 horses on board, because at that time in Europe, there were no ships designed specifically for transporting large numbers of horses. There were many ships with separate compartments, and Zheng He had ships specifically for transporting horses when he sailed to the west. Horses cannot be kept together for a long time. When the owner is present, war horses tend to be more obedient. But once the owner is gone, it is hard to say. War horses are often much more aggressive than draft horses. If two war horses are kept together and the owner is not around, they are likely to fight with each other. For example, they bite each other with their mouths or kick each other with their hooves, which can easily cause injuries to the horses. If a male horse, uncastrated, and a female horse are kept together, they will waste their energy doing shameful things. Therefore, it is best not to put war horses together to avoid the two animals causing trouble. Because of this, those stables usually only put one horse in each stall. If horses were to be transported, the ship would first have to be modified to make stable-like fences to prevent the horses from coming into contact with each other. If a group of horses were put on the deck at once, some of them would surely get injured in the fights overnight. If it was a few hundred horses, Charles VIII might have shipped them back to his country in different ships. But 8,000 horses were not easy to place. So he simply took 8,000 heavy cavalry back to his country by land. In fact, 8,000 heavy cavalrymen did not only have 8,000 war horses, but also usually had another draft horse for traveling. War horses were usually ridden to charge before the battle, and were not used to travel and carry armor to avoid the horses being exhausted during the battle. By this calculation, Charles VIII's cavalry had at least 16,000 horses. Therefore, he had to return home by land, otherwise there would not be enough ships to carry them. At the same time, the powerful Venetian navy had bypassed the Apennine Peninsula and appeared on the route from Naples to France, and began to block the route. If Charles VIII took the sea route, his ship might be sunk by the Venetian navy. Therefore, from a safety point of view, it is better to take the land route. At the end of April, 11,000 troops of the Holy Roman Empire, led by the emperor himself, came to Venice to hold a meeting with Venice. Of course, the emperor also wanted Venice to help pay for part of the bill. In addition, Venice also gathered 10,000 mercenaries, the nobles of the Italian states also brought 4,000 armored heavy infantry, and the Duchy of Milan and the Principality of Mantua sent a total of 6,000 light cavalry, not regular cavalry for charging into battle, to cooperate in the battle. With the joint efforts of several parties, the number of allied forces has exceeded 30,000. In addition, the Spanish army has also arrived in Sicily, across the sea from Naples, with several thousand people. This group of people is enough to deter the French army in Naples, forcing the French to allocate a large number of troops to guard against the Spaniards. As for the Papal States, although they also recruited a group of mercenaries, the Papal States bordered Naples. Therefore, the troops recruited by the Papal States had to defend several major cities such as Rome to prevent them from being conquered and looted by the French. You know, the French killed their way here, and I don't know how many towns they looted. They simply scraped the ground. Before, the reason why Charles VIII did not loot Rome was because he needed the Pope to appoint him as the king. Now, the Papal States has openly stood against France. If you are not careful, the French army will break through Rome and loot it. The Pope and bishops in Rome are mostly very wealthy local tyrants. If they are robbed by the French, wouldn't they cry to death? Therefore, the army of the Papal States could not participate in the alliance, and they were directly used to defend Rome. Of all the leaders who attended the meeting, the one with the highest status was naturally Emperor Maximilian I. As the person with the highest status and a professional who understood military affairs, everyone unanimously elected Maximilian I as the commander-in-chief of the coalition forces, responsible for intercepting or even destroying the French army. In addition to the emperor as commander-in-chief, Marquis Gonzaga of Mantua and Venetian commander Niccolò Pitigliano served as the emperor's deputies. In fact, this appointment was a disadvantage. It was precisely because of the word "together" that the two had difficulty coordinating during the Battle of Fornovo, which delayed the battle to a certain extent. And after the successful alliance and the position of commander-in-chief of the coalition forces, His Majesty the Emperor actually ran back to the country and quarreled with the princes of the imperial parliament for money. Until now, the princes of the empire were still arguing over whether to participate in the Italian war. The emperor wanted to increase taxes, but it was impossible. If the imperial parliament had approved the tax increase earlier, the emperor might have gathered 20,000 troops to Italy and tried to cripple France at one go. However, it was almost impossible for the imperial parliament to unite unless the country was in danger. Usually, they would quarrel for days over trivial matters. At the same time, they were also afraid that Maximilian I would take this opportunity to strengthen himself. Although Maximilian I was capable, he was limited by the emperor's limited power and could not do anything about the dukes and counts in his territory. As for Marin and the 11,000-strong imperial army, they were left in Venice and temporarily led by the emperor's deputy, Count Alfred, a member of the Habsburg family. But Marin, who had been in the imperial system for more than a month, heard that Count Alfred was mediocre in ability and not very courageous. It was only because he was from a branch of the Habsburg family in Styria, Austria, and was relatively loyal to the emperor that he was entrusted with the command of the army. As for Frederick II, Count of Hohenzollern, whom the emperor relied on the most, he had to stay in the country to command the army and guard against the Hungarians. After all, the Habsburg family's nest was destroyed by the Hungarians, which was a scar in the hearts of the Habsburg family. Even if he sent troops to Italy, Maximilian I did not dare to give up his vigilance against the Hungarians. In the days that followed, Count Alfred led the imperial army to hang out in Venice, waiting for the emperor's return. As for Marin, he led his phalanx to practice basic skills and be ready for battle at any time. Chapter 39 Night Combat Training. Marin is an ambitious man, unlike Count Alfred, who is just a lazy guy waiting to die. In order to realize his ambition, Marin must have outstanding performance in the war. Therefore, since arriving in Italy, Marin began to plan various matters. In fact, Marin knew the course of the war in history and could also come up with some targeted plans. However, Marin did nothing and did not show himself in front of the commander, because he was afraid that his intervention would change the course of the war. In that case, his foresight would be useless. Therefore, Marin said nothing all the time, just watching the princes of the alliance discussing and arguing heatedly. Seeing this group of princes, Marin suddenly remembered the plot of the 18 princes against Dong Zhuo. The scene before my eyes was very similar to the 18 princes' rebellion against Dong Zhuo. The same heroes gathered together, the same high spirits, and the same failure in the rebellion against Dong, France. Even Charles VIII, like Dongjua, escaped without any harm. Every time there was an officer meeting, Marin, as the lowest-ranking square commander who attended the meeting, would sit in a corner, daydreaming and saying nothing. And Count Alfred, for some reason, also had no desire to show off. He let the Venetians and Manduvans show off while he sat quietly on the sidelines. Marin seemed to feel like he was at a fashion show in Milan, where a bunch of Italians were showing off. And, Marin couldn't understand their Italian. Marin only knew German, English, Latin, and Frisian, which was very close to English, taught by Mrs. Mary, but he was fluent in Italian. Although Latin and Italian both originated in Italy, they are two very different dialects from different times, making it difficult for them to communicate with each other. So, Marin could only watch the Italians show off and brag in Italian dialect, just like he couldn't understand the Cantonese dialogues in Hong Kong movies in his previous life. Marin had no intention of listening to the Italians bragging, but instead recalled the details of the Battle of Fornovo, the only major battle between the Allied forces and the French army. Marin remembered that at the battle, the French army had 8,000 French heavy cavalry and 4,000 Swiss spearmen. However, Charles VIII had thrown away all the heavy artillery during the previous march, but he was reluctant to leave behind the gold and silver treasures. But Charles VIII was no ordinary man. When he found that the French army was blocked by 20,000 to 30,000 coalition troops, in order to prevent the enemy from relying on the numerical advantage to encircle the French army, he resolutely scattered gold, silver and treasures on the left and right wings of the French army. As expected, when the 6,000 coalition light cavalrymen were encircling the French army, they saw the gold, silver and treasures on the ground and dismounted to pick up the gold, silver and treasures instead of attacking the French army. Then, the coalition's encirclement plan failed, and the French army also escaped the fate of failure. Marin didn't care about the gold, silver and treasure. He became a mercenary to earn a title, not for money. Besides, when it comes to making money, is he a modern man afraid of having no ideas? Therefore, Marin secretly decided that he must make great contributions in this battle so that he could exchange his title with the emperor. According to memory, during the battle, the Swiss blocked the charge of the Venetian infantry, while the light cavalry of Milan and Mantua were busy picking up treasures. But Charles VIII was unwilling to fight a bloody battle with the coalition forces, so on the night of July 6, he left 4,000 Swiss spearmen to guard the rear, and fled overnight with 8,000 French heavy cavalry. Moreover, Marin recalled that it seemed that it had just rained heavily that afternoon, and the roads must have been difficult to travel. If Charles VIII wanted to escape at night, he certainly couldn't take the small roads, because his heavy cavalry was not suitable for taking small roads. Then, Marin was sure that Charles VIII's heavy cavalry group must have fled along the main road that night. At night, no one could see clearly, so Marin estimated in his mind whether he could take advantage of the situation and even stop the French cavalry group. After repeated speculation, Marin felt that he could take the opportunity to stop the French cavalry group. At present, Marin also had 1,100 soldiers in his hands. Although he could not compete with the 8,000 French cavalry, he could still hold the intersection and block the French army's retreat. The most important thing is that the French have lost all their artillery. Without artillery, the cavalry cannot break through the spear formation. In addition, they will also set up double trenches and pointed wooden stakes, which can completely stop the French army. Of course, it was impossible for these 1,100 people to destroy the French army. Therefore, while blocking the French army, he had to ask for help from the coalition forces. If the coalition forces could send troops to attack from both sides, the French would be doomed to fail. For this reason, Marin began to train for night battles during training, and specifically added many subjects to fight against heavy cavalry. For example, heavy cavalry were covered in plate armor, so it was difficult to kill them with a spear. If the French heavy cavalry abandoned their horses and dismounted to fight on foot, the spearmen would be in trouble. So, Marin thought about it and selected 100 strong men from the square formation, and formed a warhammer team under the leadership of Khan. No matter how thick the plate armor is, it is afraid of being hit by a hammer. After all, the shock force of the hammer hitting down can completely knock out and injure the heavily armored knight. If it hits the head, it can even kill him with one hammer. To this end, Marin bought a batch of blacksmith hammers, replaced them with longer wooden handles, and started training the warhammer team. In addition, Marin also selected a group of people with good ventriloquism to simulate the sound of thousands of troops to scare the French because it was difficult to see clearly at night. It was indeed dangerous for me to use 1,100 people to stop 8,000 French iron lumps. If the French knew my true identity, wouldn't they kill me? Therefore, pretending to be a huge army and scaring the French in other directions was also a good idea. A few days ago, Marin personally presided over the night combat training. But a few days later, Marin handed over the night combat training to Schwartz. He personally took Sauer and Kahn to Fornovo to conduct a field survey and draw a local topographic map. Then, Marin returned to Venice with a thick stack of parchments, all of which were topographic maps of Fornovo drawn by Marin himself, with contour lines drawn on them. In the days that followed, Marin trained his troops at night, slept in the morning, and studied maps and thought about battle plans in the afternoon. What the unfortunate Charles VIII didn't know was that before he evacuated from Naples, someone in Venice had already begun to plot against him. Moreover, the target was the 8,000 most fundamental heavy cavalry. You have to know that these heavy cavalry are all French native armed forces, not those Swiss mercenaries who will work for whoever pays them. If these heavy cavalry were lost, France would definitely suffer a great loss. Chapter 40, Charles VIII's Retreat to the North. In Naples, Italy, King Charles VIII of France was very distressed and even a little desperate. Why? Since entering Italy, the French army had been very successful, so-called invincible in every attack and every battle. Basically, the Italian troops who resisted the French army fled when they saw the French army. Therefore, the French army had almost no losses from Lombardy to Naples. Only after entering Naples did they lose a lot of people in several siege battles. In other battles, the Italians basically fled on their own. However, after entering Naples, the French army contracted a strange and terrible disease, syphilis. This extremely serious infectious disease is mainly spread through promiscuity. According to a study by scientists in 2011, syphilis was brought back from America by Columbus 2 years ago. At that time, Columbus brought back a group of Indian female slaves from the Caribbean islands in Central America, and some of these female slaves were infected with syphilis. Later, some Spaniards contracted syphilis through sexual intercourse with these female slaves. Sicily, which is adjacent to the Kingdom of Naples, is also a Spanish territory. Therefore, some Spanish prostitutes brought syphilis to Sicily, and then, through prostitutes in Sicily, it was transmitted to the neighboring Neapolitans, and then to the Kingdom of Naples. After the French army occupied the Kingdom of Naples, tens of thousands of young men, including some coquettish ones, went to the brothels in Naples to mess around. Then, they got addicted. In this era, mercenaries were particularly fond of drinking and visiting prostitutes. Then, with these Naples prostitutes as the medium, many French people were infected with this serious disease. As a result, many French and Savoy soldiers were infected, and began to develop pustules shaped like plums all over their bodies. Their skin began to fester. And then they died. Because the patients of this disease died so tragically, there was a serious panic among the French army. What's even more tragic is that the French had no idea where this disease came from. Because of the rampant syphilis, the morale of the French army dropped to the lowest point. At the same time, Charles VIII learned that Venice, the Papal States, the Duchy of Milan, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain and some small Italian states had formed an anti-French alliance. Not only that, the powerful Venetian navy also dispatched a fleet to bypass the southern tip of the Apennine Peninsula and began to block the sea route from Naples to Marseille, France. This made Charles VIII realize that if he continued to stay in Naples, he might be trapped here. It would be fine for others to be trapped here, but not for him. He was the king of France, and if he was away from home for a long time, it would easily lead to changes in the country. In addition, it was said that the British had also begun to harass the Brittany region in northwestern France. Therefore, Charles VIII decided to return home to stabilize the situation. To this end, he selected soldiers who were not infected with syphilis from the army and sent them back home with him. Fortunately for Charles VIII, among his tens of thousands of troops, most of the heavy cavalrymen who came from French knight families did not contract syphilis, probably because they lived a relatively restrained life. They were not good people either. Most of the soldiers who contracted syphilis were those unruly mercenaries, especially those from Savoy and Piedmont, Italy. These bastards were the most lustful and hungry, so the infection rate was also very high. By May, the 23,000-man army of the Duchy of Savoy had basically collapsed, leaving only a few thousand panic-stricken people, who had completely lost their fighting spirit. Many people, out of fear, quietly fled the army and returned to their hometowns. As for the French army, it was not so bad. Charles VIII selected 8,000 healthy French knights and 4,000 Swiss mercenaries and began to march north, intending to return to the country before the anti-French alliance could react. First, to maintain domestic stability, and second, to avoid the terrible syphilis. At the same time, in order to control the Kingdom of Naples, which had already been occupied, Charles VIII left the unlucky Gilbert de Montpensier as the governor of Naples to lead the remaining troops to continue to occupy Naples. This man was unlucky later and seemed to die of syphilis. Then, the French army in Naples collapsed and the French were driven out of Italy. Charles VIII's retreat to the north was an act of escape. Therefore, the morale of the French army was relatively low. Due to the severe shortage of supplies, and the fact that 8,000 heavy cavalrymen carried as many as 16,000 horses, each heavy cavalryman carried a warhorse and a packhorse, the demand for food and grass was extremely high. Because the sea transportation route was cut off by the Venetian navy, the French were short of supplies. Therefore, Charles VIII had to order troops to be sent along the way to grab food, otherwise, the French army would not be able to continue. In fact, not all of the 12,000 French soldiers selected by Charles VIII were healthy. Some of them were infected with syphilis, but the virus was still incubating in Naples. So, it was not seen at the time. But on the way north, these guys raped local women while robbing food. Then, syphilis spread along the French army's march route. At this time, the people of Italy were very angry about the brutality of the French army, and they organized militias to resist. Therefore, the French army encountered a lot of resistance as it marched northward. In order to obtain enough supplies, the French army often had to besiege those small cities. Although the fierce resistance was ultimately defeated, it greatly delayed the French army's march northward, making the French army's advance very slow. When passing through the Papal States, the Pope was cunning and knew that the French would rob, so he had already transferred all the main supplies to several large cities with strong defenses, such as Rome, forcing the French army to find those remote small towns to rob in the Papal States in order to obtain enough food and supplies. Otherwise, Charles VIII could not afford to support so many people and horses. While the French were dragging their feet in their northward march, the anti-French coalition was also dragging its feet and quarreling endlessly. Of course, the Italians' quarrels were not like those of the Holy Roman Parliament. The quarrels in the Holy Roman Empire Parliament were fierce struggles and the joint restrictions of the various princes on the emperor. The Italians' quarrels were often over trivial matters, which made people laugh and cry. On the way to the south, Marin also saw the funny things of Italian mercenaries. Often, when seeing a beautiful girl many Italian mercenaries would leave the team without permission and go out to pick up girls, completely ignoring military discipline and regulations. When they come across some wineries, these bandit-like Italian mercenaries will break into the houses and steal the wine from the owners. Then, you will see Italian mercenaries with many wine bottles tied to their bodies on the march. So, in fact, the anti-French coalition army was not marching any faster than the French at that time. The French were slowed down because of food shortage, while the Italians were slowed down because of their stupidity. Moreover, because the nominal commander of the coalition forces, Maximilian I, was absent, the Marquis of Mantua and the Venetian general Niccolò Pitigliano seemed to be competing for the command of the coalition forces, resulting in chaos in the army. Count Alfred seemed to be very dissatisfied with the Italians' antics, so the army of the Holy Roman Empire did not go with Italy, but took a different route. However, in order to wait for the emperor to return, the army of the Holy Roman Empire deliberately slowed down, even lagging behind the Italian army. Marin seemed to understand why the Battle of Fornovo was fought by the Italian coalition forces, and the Holy Roman Empire had nothing to do with it. Because the two armies were not even together. The two armies were divided into two routes. The Italian Legion, headed by Italian states such as Venice, Mantua, and Milan, had a total of about 20,000 people and was one of the routes. The other route was temporarily led by Count Alfred, including 11,000 troops from the Holy Roman Empire and troops from several small Italian states that had close relations with the Holy Roman Empire, a total of 15,000 troops. Therefore, history books also say that the Holy Alliance had a total of 35,000 troops. But in fact, the 15,000 troops of the Holy League did not participate in the Battle of Fornovo at all. That battle was fought entirely by the Italian coalition forces, so it is not surprising that such a situation occurred. Marin did not interfere with the marching. It was only the beginning of June. It would take about a month for the Italian coalition to confront the French. If he intervened, the Italians and the French might not meet. By then, his foresight would be useless. Chapter 41 Seeking Solo Action. The influence of the Venetians in Italy was indeed strong. Every day, new information came from the Apennine Peninsula of Italy. A lot of the information was sent by merchants from all over Italy. In Italy, Venice is the largest merchant country. Even in other city-states, many merchants have to buy goods from Venetian merchants. Therefore, except for those who are close to Venice's rival Genoa, is this harmonious? Most Italian merchants have dealings with Venice and are willing to provide news to Venice. Every morning, as a phalanx leader, Marin was barely qualified to go to the commander's tent to listen to intelligence. Intelligence from the French came every day. Just as Marin remembered, the French were not advancing very fast. What was strange was that June was already early summer, and according to the characteristics of the Mediterranean climate in Italy, summer should be dry and hot. However, it was raining in Italy these days, as if it had entered the rainy season. Once it rained, the roads became muddy, so the marching speed of both the French army and the anti-French coalition was affected. The Apennine Peninsula is only 1,000 kilometers long in total, and the city of Naples is not located at the southernmost tip of the peninsula. It is only 600 or 700 kilometers away from the northernmost tip of the peninsula. If the French army followed the forced marching speed of 50 kilometers a day of the Black Cross phalanx under Marin, the distance could be covered in a dozen days at most. However, as the French army retreated northward, they also robbed Italian farms along the way and raped Italian peasant women. Therefore, the French army's marching speed was not fast, and it was expected that they would arrive near Parma in early July, as in history. Marin was relieved to see that the French did not change to a forced march northward because of his crossing. Then, he paid more attention to participating in the interception of the French army. Although, even if the French army is destroyed this time, it will not have much impact on France's national strength. However, if the French army is defeated in this battle, it will greatly undermine the morale of the French. You know, in war, especially in the era when cold weapons dominated, morale is very important in combat. An army with high morale can completely suppress an army with more people but low morale. On the contrary, if the morale is low, it will be dangerous no matter how many people there are. Originally, although Charles VIII did not gain much advantage in the Battle of Fornovo, this battle proved that even if the French army was hastily retreating northward, it could still beat the Italians to the point where they could not take care of themselves. The casualty ratio between the French and Italian coalition forces in this battle was 1 to 2. Therefore, the French were naturally extremely confident and invaded Italy many times afterwards. Of course, all of the above is false. What Marin really wants is to make a name for himself by severely damaging the French army. Then, he can exchange his military achievements for a higher title from the emperor. After all, the title of knight is too low and cannot be inherited. Every generation needs to be re-ennobled by the lord. However, the baron, which is above the knight, is hereditary and does not need to be re-ennobled every generation. However, what makes Marin depressed is that the 11,000 troops sent by the Holy Roman Empire and the 4,000 Italian small state troops that are dependent on the Holy Roman Empire, under the leadership of the unmotivated Count Alfred, are actually far behind the Italian stupid coalition. According to Count Alfred, he wants to wait for the emperor to come and lead everyone. But Marin knew that the emperor would not come back in a short time. You know, the emperor's current situation is very bad. In the Holy Roman Empire, only the nobles of the Swabian League and the Duke of Saxony supported him, while other powerful princes and their brothers worked together to block the Habsburg family and prevent the Habsburg family from becoming too powerful, thereby weakening and depriving them of their autonomy. At present, the dukes and counts of the Holy Roman Empire are basically equivalent to local emperors in their own territories, and they have the final say. But if the Habsburg family becomes strong, they will definitely not be happy to take back some of their rights. You know, there is a precedent. It was similar to the Holy Roman Empire before, a feudal system with decentralized power. However, after the efforts of previous generations of French kings, France has gradually embarked on the road of centralization. Maximilian I envied the power of the French king and had intentions in this regard. This made the princes in the Holy Roman Empire very worried, and they were not happy to have their power deprived. Therefore, they tried their best to trip up Maximilian I to prevent the Habsburg family from becoming too powerful. Maximilian I had long been prepared to oppose the French invasion of Italy, but the dukes in the Holy Roman Empire turned a blind eye to the French invasion of Italy. After all, it was not the Holy Roman Empire that was invaded. Although some Italian states once belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire later focused on the affairs of the German region, and after reaching an agreement with the Pope, it had long stopped asking about the affairs of the Italian region. As for the threat from the French, the dukes and counts were more worried about the threat from the Habsburg family. Therefore, it was too difficult for Maximilian I to ask them for help. Without the emperor, Count Alfred seemed unwilling to move. After all, the earl knew that he was not as talented as the others. But in terms of loyalty, Count Alfred was unquestionable. Therefore, the earl honestly led his army behind the main force of the coalition forces, waiting for the emperor to lead them. However, the earl could wait, but Marin couldn't. He was still hoping to gain some merit in this battle. If he couldn't even participate in the battle, then this trip to Italy would be in vain. Therefore, he had to find a way to participate in that battle. However, it was not realistic to persuade Count Alfred to lead his army to Parma to join the coalition forces. The Count himself disliked Italians and wanted to wait loyally for the Emperor's return. No matter how the Marquis of Mantua and others urged him, he refused to continue south. In fact, the Marquis of Mantua and the Venetians both hoped that the Holy Roman Army could fight the French army together. Because the Italians themselves knew that the German army was more powerful than the Italian army. Therefore, they repeatedly invited the Count to lead his troops south. However, the Italians were not the commander-in-chief of the coalition forces, and Count Alfred actually looked down on the Italians in his heart. Therefore, the Holy Roman Army was still far away from the Italian coalition forces. Marin thought about it and decided to take the initiative to ask for help to the Italian coalition forces. However, how to tell the Count was a big problem. After much inquiry, Marin learned that Count Alfred had no ambitions and was not very interested in women, but he did have a preference for money. In desperation, Marin decided to temporarily put aside his principles and commit a few robberies to collect enough money to bribe the Count. According to the Count's bribed servants, if he wanted to bribe the Count, it would probably take more than 1,000 ducats, Venetian gold coins. In order to collect the money, Marin selected a group of obedient men in the army, about 100 people, led by Saul, all covered with black cloth, and carried out several robberies at night on the border of Venice where they were stationed. Soon, Marin got 1,000 gold coins and 5,000 silver coins. Marin gave 1,000 ducats to Count Alfred and took the initiative to request to go south to support the Italian coalition. Count Alfred was greedy for money, and was annoyed by the Italians' request for help, so he sent a phalanx to reinforce. So the Count agreed to Marin's request and issued a document, requiring Marin to lead the Black Cross phalanx to the south to reinforce the Italians and accept the dispatch of the Marquis of Mantua. At this time, it was already June 20th, and the Battle of Fornovo would soon break out. After receiving the transfer order, Marin immediately organized his troops to move south. However, Marin did not intend to go to the Italian coalition, but wanted to act alone. Therefore, his march was also covert, not taking the Roman road, but taking a more remote road. And these roads were previously explored by Saul. Marin thought that if he rushed to the Italian coalition with the documents, he would not get any good results, because the group of Italians who were afraid of death might arrange his phalanx to serve as cannon fodder and fight the French on the front line. Moreover, once he accepted the leadership of the Marquis of Mantua, he would have no choice. Because once he was under the command of the Marquis of Mantua, he could not act on his own. Otherwise, it would be a violation of military regulations. If he sent troops on his own, he would be executed in serious cases, or beaten to a pulp with a military stick. However, he was ordered to help the Italians, but before his phalanx arrived at the Italian camp, he was free. Because he was the commander of this phalanx. The only trouble was the three sands mixed in the phalanx, the Emperor and the Count of Hohenzollern. They might be dissatisfied with him for not following orders, and even tell on him afterwards. But Marin didn't care about their betrayal, because even if the three of them betrayed, they would have to wait until after the war. In the army, they could be dissatisfied, but they dared not disobey orders. Otherwise, Marin had the power to deal with them. Even if he couldn't kill them, he could imprison them temporarily. Moreover, the three of them didn't have a good control over their own company. Because Marin also mixed his own sand in their company. The 3 knights who were sent to be company captains all brought their own followers. Of the 10 squads under their command, 5 were naturally led by their own attendants. And the remaining 5 were all assigned by Marin. The knights' attendants naturally followed the knights, but the squad leaders assigned by Marin would also follow Marin. Usually, when he had nothing to do, Marin openly invited the squad leaders who were mixed into the other 3 knights' companies to drink and eat meat. The 3 knights had no way to deal with this. Because Marin invited them in the name of inviting old brothers to get together, can you still stop him? Moreover, Marin was willing to let them control half of his warriors, which was already a face for the Emperor and the Earl.